Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Richard's Beer Reviews. Today, I got a very good beer. This is Black Quad, and it's a quadruple, which is a name used in Abbey's or Trappist beer. But this is not a Trappist beer because Trappist is a protected name, just like champagne. You can't say you're making champagne in Wisconsin. So that's why it says Trappist inspired beer, because this beer was brewed in Rio Ale Brewing Company here in beautiful Texas. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Rio Ale Brewing Company. They make some delicious beers. This happens to be an ale. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Trappist and Abbey beers and what makes them different and special. But this is what it looks like. This one happens to be a dark ale. They're all very complex in flavor if there are Trappist or Trappist inspired, and they're very fruity in flavor. So it's the most complex, sophisticated beer brewing there is. It's kind of like the wine of beers. So if you want a real delicious beer to enjoy, go for Trappist. Chimay is a real Trappist. Most Trappists come from Belgium, and I'll tell you why. They come from Belgium and not France. But Chimay is a real Trappist. This is a Trappist inspired because it's brewed in the U.S. So stick around, and I'll tell you a little bit of history about beer and how delicious this beer is. So again, there's so much history in this beer, but to briefly encapsulate it, is the monks evaded Rome around the first monastery is claimed to be in Egypt by Saint Anthony in around 260 years, and then when the Catholics were no longer persecuted after Charlemagne, then they went back to France and Italy, and the spread of monks and monasteries became a big thing. That's where monks can practice their religion. Um, Around the year 900, monasteries were cut off from the church funding. That means they had to be self-sufficient. So monasteries were secluded, and they had to produce foods. They would do some bakery, and they started making wines, especially in France. And they started producing beer. This is a way to self-sufficient themselves, because they will make beer for people to come in. They would do a lot of beer for charity, and they would also start producing. They produce three main kinds of beers. One is for their own consumption. The other one was for the charity to give to the poor, and the third was for to sell to people that came by. The reason beer was so important at that time, because at that time the water was pretty bad and contaminated. So beers had clear water, and plus they added nutrients into the beer. So it was actually a healthy drink in the monasteries. So that's a little brief history of the monasteries. Most of the monasteries were in France, but in all the way move forward to the 1700s, where Napoleon War started. Napoleon threw chaos in France, so a lot of monks run away from France, and they went into Belgium. That's why we know most of the Trappist or Abbey beers that come from Belgium. That's because they were displaced. Even after Napoleon was gone, a lot of them stay in Belgium. So that's why we know a lot of monasteries are in or beers, Trappist or Abbey beers in Belgium. But right around the end of the 1800s, or actually it was beginning of 1900s, um, big breweries started coming around, commercial breweries, and they liked the Abbey style monks beer, so they started copying their beer. But the Trappist monasteries were a little bit more organized, so what they did is they hire lawyers, and they took it to the like the Supreme Court of England, and they said you cannot copy our beer because this is our thing, and they actually won. So Trappist is not a style of beer, but it's an actually protected word. It's like champagne. You cannot make champagne in Oklahoma. So, so if you are drinking a Trappist beer, you are drinking a true beer from a Trappist monastery, and there are four rules that have to be obeyed in order to be called a Trappist. And one of them is that it has to be from a Trappist monastery, brew by monks, and all the brewers has to be managed by monks and has to be for no profit. So when you drink like a Chimay, a Trappist beer, you're really drinking a beer that is brewed in a monastery, and it all goes to a nonprofit organization. So this is why this beer that is brewed in Texas cannot call himself a Trappist, even though it's brewed very similar. It has to be called a Trappist inspired beer. So that's a quick short on what Trappist means. And I'm going to take a little break, and then we're going to tell you about what is why they call them quadruple. What does quadruple mean? So monks, all the way back, they brew three kinds of beer. Like I said before, they brew beer for charity. They also brew a beer for themselves for consumption, and they also brew a beer to sell. And obviously, the highest quality beer was the one they sold. So they brew a double, a triple, a quadruple. Or we believe that the single one was also for the peasants, but that's no longer brew anymore. So now we only know Trappist beers as double, triples, and quadruples. And the one that's for sale for consumption, most popular is the quadruple beer. So that's why you'll see most Trappist beers are either triples or quadruples. So, because most of this monk, the original brewing came from France. Obviously, what was the most common spirit in France at the time was wine. So the monks used to also grow wine. They had vineyards and they used to make wine, but then they melted it in and they started brewing beer. That's why their beers are wine like, because they're so sophisticated with so many fruity flavors added to them. So, Abbey beers or Trappist beers are considered some of the most sophisticated beers that you can buy. Okay, so again, this is the Black Quad Quadruple from the company is Rio L Brewing Company. And the last thing I want to say about monks or Trappists, by beer historians, they're considered the first people that actually put hops in beer. So we have to thank the Catholic Church monks for putting hops into our beer, which made it so much better. But not so on regards of Rio L is in Texas, in Alto, Texas. And it's in the hill country by Austin. And everybody knows that that's a beautiful place. And for some reason, it's inspired so many great brewing companies up in hill country. So I'm going to leave you with a quote from the owner of Rio Ale. His name is Brad Farbstein. And he said, "We only sell Rio Ale in the greater state of Texas," which is pretty interesting. Rio Ale only sells in Texas. We're Texans. We care about Texans. So we want to make sure that the people we care about have the highest quality beer possible. And let's face it, Texas are a thirsty bunch. So we have our work cut out for just trying to keep the refrigerators and coolers stocked with real ale. Plus, our beers are best when they are kept cold and fresh, because real ale is non-pasteurized. That means that they have to stay cold the whole time. They cannot become warm like Budweiser and Coors and be put in warehouses and then be cool again. they will lose their flavor and their specialty about real ale. So our beers are best when they kept cold and fresh. The farther away we ship, the harder it is to become ensure that our quality ingredients of the beer. Our biggest reason why we don't sell beer outside Texas is because we don't have to. We're independent and we don't answer to insatiable investor demands. We have our freedom to focus on just making the best beer and not the most beer, which is pretty cool. That's the definition of a microbrewery. That's why I love microbreweries, because they care more about quality than about investor profits. Making beer is our art and passion and dream. Growing just for the sake of growing is not our motivation. What motivates us is making great beer. If you happen to be from one of the many places in the world that isn't Texas, we highly recommend you visit Texas. We Texans love our state. When we go out of state, when we go to Europe or whatever, we don't say we're from the US, we say we're from Texas. So shout out to Texas, shout out to Rio Ale Brewery, and I hope you get a chance to try this Black Quad from Rio Ale. They make a bunch of really good beers, Axis Ale, and they make the Four Fireplace beer too. So thanks for watching, and I'll have another one coming up soon.